I'm lucky enough to live in Shropshire, and today I'm on part of the Jack Mytton Way, which is a 100-mile trail through rural Shropshire for walkers and horse riders, cyclists. And today I want to find out a little more about who it was named after. Who was the man who came to be known as Mad Jack Mytton? John Mad Jack Mytton was born on the 30th of September 1796 at Horston Hall near Oswestry in Shropshire to the country squire John Mytton and Sarah Harriet. Horston Hall was valued at around £5 million at today's reckoning, and the estate, which covers some 132,000 acres, brought in the equivalent of around £1 million annually. But tragedy struck when Jack was 2 years old and his father died, aged just 30, and the young Mytton inherited the estate. Such wealth would have made life easier for most people, but not in Jack's case. Turns out he had a bit of a wild spirit. In fact, he was as mad as a March hare. Jack was eventually packed off to Westminster School to begin his education. It didn't go well for him though, as he was expelled within a year for fighting with one of his masters. Harrow was next on the list, but once again Jack found himself expelled after 3 terms. So far so bad for a hero. A series of private tutors was attempted, but unfortunately Jack kept on playing practical jokes on them, including leaving a live horse in the bedroom of one. But despite his lack of academic success, somehow or other he was granted entry to Trinity College, Cambridge. It was doubtful he ever took up his place, but it was rumoured that he took 2,000 bottles of port along, just in case he did. Well, a chap needs sustenance after all. Predictably, Jack never got his degree, and bored with university life he set off on the grand tour, as was the fashion of the day. As a 16-year-old he had been commissioned as captain in the local yeomanry regiment, and on his return from the grand tour he was commissioned into the regular army with the 7th Hussars. He spent some time in France, which had been occupied after the defeat of Napoleon I, where he spent his time gambling and drinking, by all accounts, before promptly resigning his commission. Around this time Jack got married for the first time to a Harriet Jones. She bore him a daughter but died in 1820. Jack later married a Caroline Gifford, who gave him 4 sons and a daughter, but then promptly ran away. The two lived estranged from then on. On his return to Shropshire, he rejoined the yeomanry and was promoted to major in 1822. Jack now tried his hand in the world of politics. He offered £10 notes to would-be voters, a practice not uncommon in those days, and after having bribed the equivalent of over £800,000, Jack duly became the MP for Shrewsbury. However, he found Parliament not to his liking. It was rather boring, and because he was also a bit deaf, he couldn't really hear the debates. Parliament was dissolved in 1820, and Jack decided he wasn't going back. He must have had a change of heart, however, because in later years he did try to re-enter Parliament. His last attempt in 1832 being confounded by the fact that he was actually in exile in France, escaping from his creditors. He did, however, go on to become the High Sheriff of Merionethshire and Shropshire, as well as Mayor of Oswestry for a year. Now, most of the wild stories we know about Jack come from the book Memoirs of the Life of the Late Jack Mytton, penned by a certain Nimrod who, in reality, was his pal, Charles James Appley. Jack loved horse racing, at one time owning a successful horse called Euphrates, which stood him in good stead at the dodgy Oswestry racecourse he attended. He also loved gambling. For a bet in 1826, he rode his horse into the Bedford Hotel in Leamington Spa, took it up the grand staircase, jumping the balcony and the patrons below, before exiting through the window onto the street beyond. Now you've got to admire that. A typical country squire, Jack had a love of horses and hounds, going on hunts from the age of 10. He had a wardrobe consisting of 150 pairs of hunting breeches, 700 pairs of handmade hunting boots, 1,000 hats, and some 3,000 shirts. But despite that, Jack sometimes had an unusual light way of dressing. If it was too hot, he would gradually divest himself of his clothes until he was riding almost naked, regardless of the weather. He would also ride after being unseated, Once he fell and broke his ribs, but climbed back on. Unmurmuring, he said, though every jar was agony. Jack took his hunting seriously, and it wasn't recommended to interrupt his pursuits. But a local miner and neighbourhood tough was foolish enough to do so one day. The result was a 20-round scrap, with the miner retiring exhausted. It was reported that Jack owned over 2,000 dogs, his favourite being fed on steak and champagne, and who was allowed to sit before the great fire at Horston Hall. He also owned a menagerie of other pets, one of which was a bear. Jack decided to ride the animal into a party one day. All was going well until he decided to goad the bear with the spurs he wore. The result was unsurprising. He also had a penchant for duck shooting during the night. Getting out of bed, he'd creep to the lakes and let off a round or two, once walking stark naked across a frozen lake, before returning to his bed. On another occasion, he'd invited a local parson and doctor for dinner. After they'd left, he donned a mask and cloak, and, armed with a brace of pistols, caught up with them through the back roads. He came upon them shouting, "Stand and deliver," in true Highwayman fashion. I doubt he got a reciprocal dinner invitation. Jack once drove his horse and gig at full tilt at a toll gate. Apparently he wanted to see whether the horse could make the jump with the cart in tow. Unsurprisingly, it didn't. On another occasion, he asked his passenger whether he had ever been upset in a gig. When the man told him he had not, Jack shouted, "What? What a damned slow fellow you must have been all your life," and then drove the gig up a sloping bank at full speed, tipping himself and his passenger out. However, Jack was a notorious spendthrift and frittered away his inheritance within 15 years. He was told that if he could reduce his spending to £6,000 per annum, roughly equivalent to about £700,000 these days, he wouldn't have to sell his estate. Jack declared, "I wouldn't give a damn to live on £6,000 a year." Well, let's face it, who could? So in 1831, he sold his estate in Nines-Malvoy and fled to Calais to avoid his creditors. He had met an attractive 20-year-old woman named Susan on Westminster Bridge. He offered her £500 a year to be his companion, and she agreed, going with him to France and staying with him until he died. One night in Calais, Jack had an attack of hiccups that would not stop. "Damn this hiccup," he proclaimed, and suddenly had the idea that he could frighten the hiccups away. So he put his candle to his cotton shirt and was instantly engulfed in flames. A fellow guest and one of the servants beat out the flames. "The hiccup is gone, by God," said Jack triumphantly, before promptly retiring to bed. In the morning, a visiting doctor found Jack not only shirtless but sheetless, with the skin of his breast, shoulders and knees of the same colour as a newly singed bacon hog. In 1833, Jack returned to England. Unable to pay his debts, he was imprisoned first at Shrewsbury, then at Southwark. He died there in 1834. A round-shouldered, tottering old young man, bloated by drink, worn out by too much foolishness, too much wretchedness, and too much brandy. He was only 37. The cause of death was delirium tremens. He was buried at a private chapel at Horston. It is claimed that the term easy come, easy go was coined by Mad Jack. I for one believe it. He was the perfect example of the Regency Rake and the living embodiment of that adage. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more, then please subscribe. And I'll see you shortly for another incidental interlude.